Are our Asian partners.
An opportunity to.
Hello and welcome. I'm Sima Katauka and you're watching World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. U.S. President Donald Trump has met with Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa at the White House. The two leaders discussed cooperation against the Islamic State as Syria joined a global alliance. Trump has also praised Sharaa as a tough partner and said he looks forward to meet him again. Turkish foreign minister met with U.S. officials including Vice President J.D. Vance and U.S. Special Envoy Tom Barak to discuss Syria and Gaza. He has stressed the need for a united Syria, warning that unresolved issues in the south and north could further divide the country. The U.S. Senate has passed a bill to end the government shutdown and sent it to the White House for approval. U.S. President Donald Trump called the deal very good and highlighted upcoming reforms, including a new air traffic control system. Eight people were killed after a car exploded near New Delhi's historic Red Fort at 18:52 p.m. local time, prompting a high-level investigation led by police and security agencies. Home Minister Amit Shah has said authorities are exploring all possibilities, while Prime Minister Narendra Modi expressed condolences and ordered a full review of the incident. U.S. President Donald Trump has announced that the United States and India are close to finalizing a new trade deal. Speaking at the White House, Trump said Washington will eventually bring down tariffs on Indian imports and hailed growing bilateral cooperation. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has called for urgent anti-corruption measures following raids in the energy sector. Zelensky vowed to punish corruption as the $100 million energy scandal unfolds, while the energy minister promised full transparency in the investigation. Taiwan has evacuated more than 3,000 people ahead of Typhoon Fangwong's arrival, which is expected to strike near Kaohsiung tomorrow after killing 6 people in the Philippines. President Lai Ching-te has urged residents to avoid mountainous areas in coastal areas as authorities warn of heavy rain and flooding in Hualien and Taitung. South Korea's Coast Guard has launched a massive search operation after a Chinese fishing vessel capsized 150 kilometers off of the west coast, with 9 crew members still missing out of 11 on board. 4 South Korean Coast Guard ships and 3 aircrafts, including rescue helicopter, has been deployed, while 2 crew members have been rescued so far. Now we start with Syria and U.S. Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa has made a historic visit to Washington. Al-Sharaa has met with President Donald Trump at the White House. The meeting marks the first time a Syrian leader has visited the U.S. in years after Sharaa's rise from former al-Qaeda commander to president. Trump has praised Sharaa as a tough leader and vowed to do everything he can to help make Syria successful. Sharaa has said that his association with al-Qaeda is a matter of the past and was not discussed during his meeting with President Trump. Meanwhile, a U.S. official has announced that Syria is now part of the global alliance against Islamic State and that it is allowed to resume diplomatic operations in Washington. Trump has also expressed his hope to meet and speak with Sharaa again in the future. The meeting comes after a major shift in U.S. policy, with the Treasury Department extending the suspension of sanctions enforcement under the 2019 Caesars Act for another 180 days. However, only Congress can fully lift the sanctions. Now for this discussion, we welcome Dr. Punsara Amarasinghe. He's from Kotawala Defense University, joins us live from Colombo. Thank you very much, Professor and Doctor, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, looking at this, how is or how could President Ahmad al-Shara's visit to Washington, how is this reshaping Syria's geopolitical alignment with its relations with U.S. and West compared to traditional allies such as Russia and Iran?
By all means, President Shahra's visit becomes extremely historical because his visit happened to be the very first visit made by any Syrian president since the country became independent in 1946. But ironically, this man, President Shahra, right, he had a militant background. He was an Al-Qaeda promoter and he was fighting for global jihad. Ironically, his head was having a 10 million bounty from the US State Department. But in politics, as you know, there are no eternal friends or enemies, and this man has finally shifted to the American side. And if you look at the longer implications from this sudden shift of the policies from Washington towards Damascus, what becomes obvious is that Americans simply want to leverage their position in the Middle East to undermine the Russian expansionism. Because as you know, when President Bashar was in power, the Russians were having heavy influence over Syria. There were even Russian naval bases in Latakia and some other places. But after the fall of President Bashar, now President Shah is going to be a hardcore American supporter. And he was hosted by President Trump in White House, and the sanctions are being lifted up, and all these things are quite clearly indicating that Americans are trying to leverage these newly revived relations with Syria for greater strategic goals. The number one is to somehow dismantle the IS influence and the remaining global jihadist position in the Middle East. As you can see, for the past few weeks, Syrian forces have been launching a lot of military strikes, and they have been striking IS targets across Syria. So this is something that Washington expects from President Shara to continue. And secondly, in the longer run, we can clearly see that this influence, if it goes to the pot, it might end up paving the path to revive, to restore the relations with Israel. Maybe, I hope that might be somewhere in the long run. The Americans are trying to bring Syria to Abraham Accords to normalize relations with the state of Israel.
And now bringing Caesar's the act sanctions to a perspective or our conversation, can you tell us more about the Caesar's act sanctions and how might this affect power dynamics in the Middle East?
Yeah, so this will simply impact the power dynamics on the Middle East from multiple fronts, because mainly the Americans, but we need to acknowledge that even though the president has made this executive order to lift up all these bans, it is still yet to be confirmed. And by this, the new coalition, the increase of the US aid to Syria, the Syrians will slightly gain upper hand over the Middle Eastern influence and Middle Eastern politics. And at the same time, I need to acknowledge that this will dramatically reduce Iranian and the Russian influence over the Middle East. But before I conclude, I must mention that if you look at the history of the American influence in the Middle East, I hope that Washington has learned from its dubious past, especially in the 90s and the late 80s. The Americans were supporting leaders such as Saddam Hussein, right? And during Iran-Iraq war, Saddam Hussein was supported by Washington. And so many, the sanctions were lifted up by the US State Department. But the history has clearly shown what actually happened at the end of the day. Saddam Hussein became a fatal enemy to the United States. And the Americans were doing the same thing to Mujahideen and the Taliban in Afghanistan. And they were all historic blunders, right? So we actually cannot make any single guarantee that President Shara will always remain faithful to the Western, the allies and the intentions of the West.
Yes, and building on that, how could Syria's inclusion in the US-led coalition against Islamic State influence perception of legitimacy for this particularly Ahmad al-Shara's government, both domestically and across the globe?
Yeah, so If you look at the past few weeks, I would say that, especially, I would say that since last October, since President Shara met with the Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin in Moscow, right? So it was kind of a balancing act, but gradually it became very much clear that when Americans approached him, the President Shara's position and the entire Syrian position became very much favorable towards the Americans and the West. So the West at the moment expects one major goal to accomplish in the Middle East, that is to dismantle the global jihadism and the IS network. So as far as we understand, that Syria was kind of a cradle for the IS activism and the IS expansionism for past 1.5 decades, since 2011. So IS had very strong the bastions across Syria. So the military support is vitally important to eliminate the prevalent threats of IS and rest of the Islamic militant groups in Syria and also across the Middle East as well. So in that context, the Syrian participation in this coalition, the allied forces, Syria's active participation in the military operations will be a paramount factor for the West to accomplish all the military targets, especially in the Middle East.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Dr. and Professor Punsara Amarasinghe for joining us and sharing that insight. Thank you very much. Now we stay in the region. The U.S. Senate has passed a bill to end the longest government shutdown in American history, which is now headed to the House for final approval. The 41-day deadlock was broken after a 60-40 vote, with most Republicans and 8 Democrats backing the measure. The deal reopens the government but leaves the issue of health care subsidies, which is a key Democratic demand, for a debate in December. The House is expected to return from recess and vote on the bill within days, formally bringing the historic shutdown to an end. Let's in fact listen into what the Republican senator has said.
And I just want to reiterate my gratitude for my colleagues, our staff who have worked night and day, literally, and all of those who have brought us to this point. We are going to reopen government. We're going to ensure that federal employees, whether they were furloughed or laid off or forced to work without pay, will now receive compensation that they've earned and deserve. And we will also be able to celebrate on Veterans Day tomorrow the fact that we have passed the appropriations bill for the VA. And this would not have come about without the work of so many people, too numerous to mention. But I do want to thank my fellow appropriators, particularly the chairs of the 3 committees, Senator Bozeman, Senator Hoeven, and Senator Mullen, for their hard work.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump has praised what he called a very good bipartisan compromise, saying the agreement marks a new start. He also added that his administration wants a healthcare system that pays money to people, not to healthcare companies. Let's listen into what he has said.
Well, I will be. I'll abide by the deal. The deal is very good. We're not going to be giving $1.5 trillion to people that came in from jails and from, the gangs and drug dealers and all of these others that they wanted to be given health care, which would have hurt our health care system.
Now for this discussion, we welcome Collins Chong-Yu Keat. He's a Foreign Affairs Security and Strategy Analyst, joins us live from University of Malaya, Kuala Lumpur. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us again. Good to see you. Professor, now looking at this, how significant is the end of the 41-day longest U.S. government shutdown, and what damage would take long to undo for them? What political consequences could the shutdown have for both parties?
I think it reflects the the confidence being put in place on the courage by the Republicans, by President Trump, that the serious matters that will need to be taken care of, and of course also this is for the long-term future of the country and for the American people. And this short-term sufferings, or whatever you want to call it, it is not by design by President Trump, and that it is needed to ensure that the people, the Congress, will do its job to focus on things that matter, eventually to prioritize the American people. And that, but this Senate vote now adds the uncertainty, and that was beginning to spill into different areas. And of course, investors hate this kind of unpredictability. But this move now, it will stabilize confidence, and not just in the U.S. economy, but you also have these ripple effects across the world. But this President Trump's response has been encouraging, has been good. By calling the deal as very good, he's framing this end of this shutdown as a strategic victory to exert pressure to force real negotiations and to have the capacity to now deliver the stability needed. So this will position himself as both strong and responsible, and also consolidating capital in terms of the courage to fix broken processes and to compel Washington to take his priorities very seriously. So I think it's a very strategic win, not for President Trump himself per se, but in larger parts for the American people, to ensure that priorities are aligned now closer to home, and the end objective has always been to ensure that the American people are prioritized first, and the whatever spending and investments are for the good of the American people at large, and not for the as President Trump has stated, for the benefits of outsiders. So I think it is a very good move by President Trump himself.
And Professor, although President Trump's statement on healthcare reflects broader ideological divides within, how do you think these both parties will be doing moving forward to avoid this kind of government shutdown again?
I think the American people understand the core crux of the matter, and that for years and decades now, the Democrats have been avoiding these core issues that affect the American people, from healthcare to spending on healthcare services to aliens to foreigners. That has been the main essence of what President Trump himself has repeatedly argued, that the priorities have been misaligned, have been mismatched at the expense of the American people, and that far too many, too much inefficiencies, a bloated spending capacity that did not bring, real tangible, benefits to the American people. So Trump's message goes straight to the heart of the concerns of the American people in terms of healthcare, in terms of reducing the, healthcare prices of medicines and groceries. So too much money has been spent on corporations that do not directly benefit the American people. That's what Trump has been doing now, to tap into this public frustration, rightly so, in terms of this expensive, bloated, and corporate-driven healthcare system. So, as we can see during his first term also, he has reduced drug prices, and now in the second term he will continue to do so, and that attacking one of the most unpopular elements of the U.S. healthcare system, the dominance of the insurance companies, pharmaceutical giants, hospital systems that inflate costs at the expense of the working class of the American people. So I think Trump is right to bring this issue forward, and to ensure that not only for this issue but for the core issue that affect the American people at large, which will be, of course, with regards to immigration, with regards to the inflow of fentanyl, of these things that have driven this new crisis of health of the American people, and also the safety of the American people. So I think the American people at large understand why President Trump has to do this and why Republicans have to do this. And this is a message to Democrats also, that it is high time for priorities to be emphasized and to be prioritized for the benefits of the American people at large, and for the American middle class also.
Yes, indeed. With that, I would like to thank Professor Collins Chong-Yew Keat for joining us all the way from Malaysia and sharing that insight. Thank you very much. Now we move on to India. Several foreign embassies in India have expressed their condolences over the deadly blast near Delhi's Red Fort that has killed at least 8 people and injured several others. Missions from around the world have also issued statements condemning the attack and expressing solidarity with the victims and their families. Many embassies, including those of the United States, United Kingdom, and France, have also released security advisories for their citizens in India, urging them to remain vigilant and avoid the vicinity of the blast site, as well as other crowded tourist areas in Delhi. The alerts come amid heightened security across the capital and other major cities following the high-intensity explosion, which authorities are now investigating as a possible terror attack. Now we move on to our next news. U.S. President Donald Trump has announced that U.S. and India are moving closer to finalizing a new trade agreement. Speaking at the White House during the swearing-in of Sergio Gore as U.S. ambassador to India, Trump has said that the U.S. plans to bring down tariffs on Indian imports at some point. He has also cited India's previous oil trade with Russia as the reason for the current high tariffs, but claimed that India has substantially reduced such imports. The U.S. has imposed a 50% tariff on most Indian imports in 2025. This includes a 10% baseline duty, a 25% reciprocal tariffs, and an additional 25% levy introduced in August, largely in response to India's Russian oil imports. Trump has emphasized that both sides are working towards a fair deal, adding that India is a strong negotiating partner and the agreement will benefit everyone. He also noted that ongoing talks aim to balance trade and strengthening bilateral ties. The proposed deal, first discussed in February this year, seeks to boost trade volumes from $191 billion to $500 billion by 2030. Multiple negotiation rounds have already taken place, with officials from both countries expressing optimism about a first phase agreement by the end of 2025. Now for this discussion, we welcome Jayajit Bhattacharya. He's an economist and finance expert, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much for joining us again. Good to see you. Mr. Jayajit Bhattacharya, how might this reduction on U.S. tariffs towards Indian imports influence trade balances, domestic industries, and inflationary pressures on both economies? You might be muted over here, yes.
My apologies.
Yes,
So the challenges in the US economy are far more significant than in the Indian economy. The inflation in India is kind of under control, but obviously what happened was a temporary bandage that the Indian government did in the previous month because of the festive seasons, because of the changes in GST and so on. So we haven't yet faced the full brunt of the US tariffs on India. But on the other hand, because of the series of tariffs that US has put in, it has continued to face manufacturing contraction. Its demand has gone down. There is record number of layoffs, job losses happen. Some of it because of tariffs, some of it because of AI, some of it because of other reasons. And also a significant decline in consumer confidence, which is obviously linked to jobs and price concerns. If the inflation goes up and people don't have jobs, then clearly they don't want to buy. And that's the kind of vicious cycle or vicious trap that the US economy seems to be getting into. Also, there is an impending question of whether the AI bubble is going to burst anytime soon, which is going to have a very significant spiraling effect on the US economy. And therefore, the US does need to maintain and mend its trade relations with significant economies, including the Indian economy. In fact, the US government was closest to signing the trade deal with India. We were the first of the bloc. But for some strange reason that did not happen. There was an about turn that happened from the US government in the month of April this year. So I believe now perhaps some of the outstanding issues have been papered over. We haven't heard much in terms of the details from either of the governments. They're pretty tight-lipped on this matter. But it seems to be something innovative that's cooking, because there are certain red lines that India has to maintain, which are around dairy, around agriculture, and those are the same segments that the US current regime wants to address from their perspective. They want their farmers' produce to be exported to India. They want their dairy produce to be exported to India, because that's their voting base. And therefore, there was a bit of a standstill, and the trade deal went into a freeze. Hopefully, there will be something innovative created so that both parties have their standpoints clear. Touching the agriculture and dairy is a political landmine even in India, so we cannot compromise on that. More importantly, if you compromise those two segments for one single FTA, then that will get replicated in all the future FTAs, and that will put 40% of our population, which is dependent on agriculture, at risk, which is something that we cannot afford to do. So it will be very interesting to see how the solution is crafted. But all the signals are that India and US are very close to having the deal made in the next 6 to 7 weeks.
Right. And how does geopolitical considerations such as India's past oil trade with Russia affect the economic Sorry about that pause. Thank you for waiting, Mr. Bhattacharya. Let me start my question again over here. How does this geopolitical consideration of India's past oil trade with Russia affect the economic rationale behind U.S. tariff policies? And also, what does this, you talked about closeness of India and U.S. ties. What does this particular individual, Sergio Gore's assignment as an ambassador, signify?
So let me take the first question in terms of India's import of oil and energy from Russia. If you look at just the calorific value, the amount of uranium being imported from Russia by the US has got more calorific value than the oil being imported by India from Russia. Similarly, the energy imports from Europe is very, very significant. By Europe from Russia is very, very significant. So if the concern of the US administration was truly what it stated, which is to starve off the Russian government from funds because of their energy exports, then the US should have taken care of their own imports and should have also censored the imports of energy by Europe from Russia. Clearly, that was not the case. And therefore, this was more of an arm twisting mechanism being used in trade negotiations between two countries. And that was that. So if the US and India have resolved all other issues, then I don't think it'll be any fruitful for US to continue to arm twist India using any of the extraneous reasons. If there is trade between US and India that needs to happen, then it needs to happen. Any other issue is extraneous. So whether it be human rights abuse by the Americans, abuse of the rights of African Americans in US, those are extraneous issues. We don't want to get into that. Trade issues, as always has been said, should be limited to trade, and therefore what the tariff should be and what the reciprocity in the trade should be. Having said that, there has been a significant disruption that has happened in the relationship between US and India because of the way the arm twisting has happened from the American side. And therefore, with the new President Gore coming in, who is supposed to be close to President Trump, it's a signaling that the US is serious about fixing the disruption that has happened between the US and India ties. Also, there has been the war between Pakistan and India, the terrorism that was initiated by Pakistan against India, and what seems to be the American nod or a wink towards all these activities that Pakistan has been doing, killing innocent civilians in India. I think those will all come up and needs to be addressed if the new ambassador is really serious about mending the disrupted ties between US and India.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now moving to Europe, Ukraine's Anti-Corruption Bureau has said that it has been investigating the country's energy sector. alleging a $100 million kickback scheme involving the state nuclear power company. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has responded by saying that government officials must work together with NABU, Ukraine's anti-corruption bureau, to investigate. Let's listen in.
Будь-які результативні дії проти корупції дуже потрібні. Невідворотність покарання потрібна. Енергоатом забезпечує Україні найбільшу частку енергогенерації зараз. Чистота в компанії – це пріоритет. Енергетика і кожна галузь, кожен, хто будував схеми, повинен отримати чітку процесуальну відповідь. Вироки мають бути. І урядовці повинні працювати разом з НАБУ, разом з правоохоронними органами і так працювати, як це потрібно для результату. Я дякую всім, хто допомагає. Дякую кожному, хто з Україною.
The state agency, which operates independently of the Ukrainian government, has reported the investigation as Ukraine braces for winter with its power sector under frequent fire from Russia and facing regular outrages. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Mr. Jayjit Bhattacharya. He's an economist and finance expert, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much for staying with us. Now looking at this, how does this allegations of large-scale corruption in Ukraine's energy sector affect international investor confidence as well as foreign aid inflows, which Ukraine, as we know, highly depends on? And what impact might this investigation have on Ukraine's efforts to stabilize its energy market?
No, it does have very significant impact. And also the world will be watching how Ukraine responds and rectifies the outcome of this particular investigation. It was a long 15-month investigation, and it has been a very detailed investigation. This is not a witch hunting. This is not a politically inspired investigation. This is a very independent investigation that happened. In addition to the investments that you're referring to, there is also a challenge in terms of the paths to becoming part of EU, because visible enforcement is a core EU accession benchmark, and it's also key to sustaining the Western financial support. Also, every single dollar that goes out of the system is it degrades the wartime resilience of Ukraine. Ukraine needs every single dollar in its ability to be able to defend itself, and therefore $100 million is very significant in that context. So if in total, if you look at the impact of this particular development that has happened in Ukraine, it is quite significant. It will impact foreign aid, it will impact foreign investments, and also the fact that in the war that's having with Russia, Russia is clearly targeting the Ukrainian power sector. And therefore, if internally the power sector itself is compromised because of corruption, that's a double whammy for Ukraine, and also dissuades, therefore, the investors from coming into Ukraine. So it's pretty bad news for Ukraine in that sense.
Yes, indeed. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Jayjit Bhattacharya for joining us and sharing that insight as an economist and finance expert. Now, that's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.